Today we have a crazy story of revenge ruining a sibling's career before it even began. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, I paid my best friend back for framing me. I've always been a fan of long-lasting friendships, as for the longest time, I had someone whom I was not related to, not even in the slightest bit, become someone I could call a brother, and it was by far the best moments in time of my life. But then again, due to some certain behaviors, things could ultimately not work out between the both of us, as we had a difference of ideas and ideals. Similar to cases where people would get backstabbed by those they hold the closest to heart, such was the case between my best friend and I, as we were both quite literally birds of the same feather. We did everything together, down from living directly opposite of each other and even sometimes having more sleepovers in the other's place of residence, to convincing people that we were actually brothers. Now one might begin to wonder what might have gone wrong with the two of us later on along the line, as in a few years after graduating from high school and getting into college, things went from 100% likeness to about a 100% in the other direction. And all of these were just due to personal greed and not from my end. It all began when we were in high school, but I'd like to give a little backstory on the both of us. My best friend, male 18, and I, male 17, were, or rather have been, friends for the longest time. And this was not attributed to the fact that we both had similar tastes and all, but the main reason why we were as close as we were was because of the relationship our parents had at the time. Apparently, my father and his father attended the same high school and college when they were younger, and they even got married to our mothers, who in their own different situation, were also best friends when they were back in high school. And they only reconnected when they both found out about each other from their respective partners. Our connection truly is a fared one, or rather was a fated one. Anyways, right from the moment we both were born, we had always had each other's backs, as we were our own company. Our houses were quite literally directly opposite each other, and there was no reason for us to even engage in a quarrel of any sort. And even when we did, we always resolved it immediately at the time. Anyways, we were basically inseparable, and to top things off, we both were the only children of our parents. I do not know the reason for this till this day, but apparently both our parents only wanted just one child, and when they had my best friend and myself, they basically didn't want any more. Now, I know that I've been making reference to the fact that we were inseparable and all, but then I want to make it known that we were both different individual beings that were ultimately unique in our own ways. Even though we both basically liked the same things, there were still some things that we both couldn't agree on, and matters we couldn't see eye to eye on, and most importantly, we both had different points of views on matters, and I only got to realize this as we grew older. Fast forward a little bit to when we both were in high school. The then trend for boys our age at the time was owning a mobile gaming device, one of which had the then most popular game. And this was because once a person had this, they were quite literally put on a whole different level than the other students. However, there was just one problem, and this was the fact that this gaming device in question was by no means cheap. It cost so much that I could never have even fathomed how some of our friends were able to afford it. But then again, some of them came from financially stable households. My best friend and I, on the other hand, were not so privileged, and so the idea of even owning one of those gaming devices was all but a dream at the time. I knew at the time that I could not even bring up the matter to my parents, as this seemed like quite a reckless spending, and my parents were trying to teach me financial responsibility at the time, as I was already growing into a mature adult and all. However, my best friend on the other hand was overly invested in this. Or rather, I could say that he was too invested, making it seem like he had an uncontrollable addiction or urge to get this device, regardless of its price and whether or not he could afford it. I had initially thought that this was just a feeling that was going to go away, as it was seeming like he was just being pressured by the way most of our friends were flaunting it and all, but then he knew full well that he couldn't have afforded it, and the fact that there was nothing he could have done to have gotten one. And yet he still went ahead and did the one thing I never could have imagined he could do. He actually stole one of the devices from one of our friends that was quite carefree and careless with his device and all. This was by far one of the biggest mistakes he could have ever made. One that would bear consequences for not only myself but also him too. So this is how everything went down. The day he decided to steal this device, he did so without anyone's knowledge, and also with the main aim of being as discreet as possible. But the one thing he knew that he couldn't do was hide things from me, as I would eventually come to find out. So what he did was, the moment he got the device, he immediately came over to my place and he hid it among my belongings, waiting for me to get back home so that he would bear the news to me and all. Little did he know that this device had some complex features that allowed for a wide range of features that allowed its user, or rather its owner, to locate it, no matter where it was, as far as the device location was turned on. Now, this was just incriminating and nothing more, as when the owner of the device had noticed that said device was already missing, he made sure to enable this feature, which enabled him to locate his device, and this was when he had realized that it was stolen. And this was infuriating, majorly because the cost of obtaining said device was seriously high, and also the difficulty level of obtaining this device too was unbelievable. Anyways, after finding out all the necessary information about the location of the device and about me, the owner came banging at my front door when I got home, and when the whole matter was presented to my parents, obviously they knew my character and the fact that I would never steal, and they defended me, and even I was confused, as I knew there was no possibility that I could have taken this device from him. Then he came out with his evidence, as he showed my parents proof that the device was indeed in our home. And then this was when my parents became infuriated. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. But then again, they trusted me enough to back me up, and they drove him away. Thinking back now, I guess this was the worst possible way my parents could have handled the entire situation, as this was the moment when things really got heated. The owner of the device was already looking to involve his parents in this matter, which was going to lead them to taking legal action against myself and my parents. Things took a terrible turn real quick, as neither myself nor my parents knew what was going on. The only person in the light in this situation was my best friend, but then he chose to keep quiet about the whole incident, basically to watch how things would play out and if he could still get his hands on the device after all the heat had died down on this matter. The owner was soon at our doorstep yet again, not even 24 hours since his previous visit. Only difference was this time he had come with his parents and some other individuals, most of which were intimidating on their own, but now they were together, right in front of our home. They held a search warrant, as this was the only way they could legally search our home, and they did so, and even though both myself and my parents believed that there was nothing to hide, we soon were left with our tongues rolling out of our mouths as they brought out the device from my bedroom. This was really confusing, as I had not the faintest idea how the device got into my room. At this point, there was nothing I could do, as pleading at this point seemed pointless, as the owner of the device and his parents were no longer willing to accept just an apology. At this point, I was already accepting my fate. I knew for a fact that there was no way I could get any severe punishments, as this was just a simple misunderstanding. But I guess I was wrong, as I never anticipated for the owner of the console's parents to have some connections and strings to pull, as they weren't willing to let this slide with just an apology and compensation. Basically, to cut the long story short, I was court-ordered to spend the next 8 months at the juvenile home for young offenders. Things were seeming like they were going too far, and I knew for a fact that this was not real. I mean, I didn't even take it. Deep down, I knew this, but there was quite literally no way for me to prove this, and I just accepted my situation. It was only after I had spent 5 months in the juvenile home that I had come to realize that not only was this whole case clear from the get-go, but I was just so blind to it. I mean, there was the one person that had uncontrolled access to my bedroom and actually had motive to steal the device. Well, not from the victim in particular, but then you get the gist. I was able to piece every piece of information I had at the time together, and I finally figured out what was really going on here. I called my parents and asked them to come along with my best friend, and when they did, the first question I asked him was whether or not he was responsible for my then situation. And after seeing his reaction, I just knew right then and there. But he kept on denying this, as he said that I had no concrete evidence, and his behavior and attitude took a complete 360 degrees in the opposite direction. He stormed out of the visiting room, and I didn't see him again until after I was let out. When I came out, I was filled with rage and an uncontrollable urge to head on over to his place and give him a piece of my mind. But I chose not to do that, as I needed him to go through what I had just gone through. And so I went back to the owner of the device to have a word with him as regards some of the features of his device, and asked if there was a camera feature that let him have access to whomever it was that picked up the device. And to his surprise and not mine, seeing as I had done my research, we found out that we could actually see the people that had picked up the device, as it was saving every single picture taken whenever the device was attempted to be unlocked. And when we went through the records from prior to my sentence to the juvenile home, we found out that not only was I not the culprit, but my best friend was also making use of the device the day of my arrest before they confiscated it. This was all I needed. Although I'd spent time, and all was well with the owner of the device, I needed to make him feel what I felt, and suffer the way I did. And so I took the new piece of evidence and rendered it before the court. With the help of my parents and the victim's lawyers, we were able to get justice for myself specifically. And after the whole proceeding, he was given a 1.5 years at the juvenile home. As he was being escorted out of the courtroom, I simply gave him a smirk that I could tell ticked him off seriously. But then he got what he deserved, and that was basically the end of our friendship, but at least justice prevailed. Can I just point out that OP was saying when the best friend visited with OP's parents, they said he stood up, turned around 360 degrees and walked away? If that were actually the case, he would get up, turn 360 degrees, and then proceed to walk directly into the table he was just sitting at, because 360 degrees is a circle. I'm sorry, it was just the one detail that popped out and stuck in my head. That said, I've heard of the idea of devices that take a picture when you're trying to unlock it and you fail, but I don't know of any off the top of my head that actually do so. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, friend bashes my brand new car, so I frame her for maxing out her dad's credit card. Back in my high school years, I couldn't say I was hanging out with the right type of crowd. I mean, I had the Dream Squad. We were the most popular group of friends in school. I had an Instagram account with over 100,000 followers at the time, so I was pretty popular even outside of school. I did ads for skincare and cosmetic companies, and I was well on my way to making it into the world of entertainment. My friend Julie, 17-year-old female, was a dancer and the leader of the cheerleading squad. Her brother Mike, 18-year-old male, was in the lacrosse team, and his girlfriend Miley was also in the cheerleading squad. We had some other friends, but we were the main four for the longest time. Everyone wanted to be part of our exclusive circle. I received gifts from secret admirers and adoring fans almost every day, and to the outside person, it felt like our lives were perfect. But that's just it. Being on the outside doesn't give enough perspective to what was happening on the inside. We were friends, yeah, but these guys weren't the type of people I'd turn to if I had a problem or looked for life advice from. If I wanted to hang out and have a good time, maybe throw a party or something, sure, they're my first call, but nothing else. Besides, we were all very competitive. We didn't have an actual leader of the group, but everyone wanted to be number one. Of course, we all tell ourselves that we're all equal and there's no need for a leader or anything like that, but we were always trying to surpass each other. If Julie gets the latest iPhone 15 today, I'm definitely getting the iPhone Pro Max tomorrow. Or if Mike gets a ticket to an exclusive concert, then I'm going to try my best to make his tickets useless by getting VIP tickets or backstage passes to the same show. To be honest, having friends you can't rely on when you're having problems as a teenager can make life really lonely. Because those years are one of the loneliest phases of life for anyone. You're going through so much. Things you can't tell your parents because it's been 1 billion years since they were teenagers, and they can't relate to our problems. You can't talk to your siblings because of course they're all jerks and all they'll do is laugh at your problems, so you're pretty much alone. I felt alone for a long time, till I met Roxanne. It was after Christmas break and we had just resumed school. I think we were in English class or something when the principal walked in with her. She talked to our teacher, let's call her Mrs. E, 42-year-old female. The principal left and Mrs. E introduced Roxanne, 17-year-old female, to the class. I didn't think much of Roxanne then, aside from the fact that she was really pretty. Then one day, I was in the hallway, texting when Roxanne walked up to me. She introduced herself and said she was a huge fan of mine. As I said, I was trying my hand in the entertainment industry and I'd just released a single track. It hadn't gotten any traction and I've been getting terrible reviews from people. Even my friends hadn't listened. So when Roxanne told me she liked my song, I was intrigued. We talked a lot in the hallway, and seeing that we had a lot in common, we became friends. Roxanne didn't have anything that made her stand out, like me with my influencing thing, Julie with her cheerleading thing, or Mike doing lacrosse. The only thing she had was that her family was rich. I think her dad was some kind of attorney or something. Their house was the largest on their street. The first time she invited me over, I was in awe. They had everything. A ballroom for events, a mini basketball court, a swimming pool. It was crazy. I felt jealous at first, but Roxanne was so warm and welcoming that my jealousy didn't last. She was different from my other friends. If Julie had a place like that, she would have been so condescending towards me that I probably would have hated her. Roxanne was her direct opposite. I loved spending time with her because it never felt like we were in some type of competition. I could talk to her about anything and she gave the best advice and moral support. Soon enough, I was spending more time with her than my other friends. And that was when all my problems started. Julie and Mike noticed that I'd been blowing them off. Anytime they invited me for a hangout, I'd always made up some type of excuse so I wouldn't have to go. It happened like this for a few weeks straight, till they figured out that I was hiding something. I knew they would be suspicious at one point, but I didn't expect them to care enough to look into it. But I was wrong. One Friday, it was the end of the school day and I was in the hallway packing my stuff and getting ready to go home. I was meeting up with Roxanne in my place, so I wanted to leave the school early. Just before I could leave, Julie and the rest of my friends caught up with me. They told me they were going to Miley's house to hang out. Her parents were out of town and she had the whole house to herself for the weekend. I promptly declined and told them that I had something important to do. They said okay, and I thought that was the end, but it wasn't. I got home and after a while, Roxanne joined me. We were watching a movie when my mom told me that someone was at the door. I went to check and, to my surprise, Julie and the gang were standing at the door. They came in and saw Roxanne. I'd been trying to keep our friendship a secret from them because they always tended to steal all my friends. I was friends with Miley before Mike decided that he wanted to date her. I didn't want the same thing to happen with Roxanne, so I kept our friendship a secret. But the cat was out of the bag, so I had to introduce her. I hoped that when they satisfied their curiosity, they would leave, but I was wrong. They decided to stay and hang out with us instead. After that day, Julie and my friends started to invite Roxanne to all our hangouts. You would think they were just being friendly, but I know the truth. Julie was just trying to get back at me for ditching our hangouts. I hoped she'd get tired of her soon and things could go back to normal, but it didn't. They kept inviting Roxanne to things and soon enough, she became the 5th member of our group. I tried to get her to ditch them, but she wouldn't. She started to enjoy their company more than mine, and it was really annoying to watch. Over the next few months, Roxanne changed completely. She started to behave more like Julie and the guys. I thought it was only a coping mechanism so she could feel more accepted in the group, but no, it wasn't. She just started emulating Julie and she became good at it. It was difficult for me to watch her become so sarcastic and bitter. We couldn't even hang out together again because she was no longer a safe space for me to discuss things that are going on with me. She no longer gave me the listening ear or the friendly advice that I once got from her, and it hurt. But there was nothing I could do about it. After a while, I noticed the lengths Roxanne was going to impress the gang. She would take them all to the mall for shopping or to expensive restaurants. I knew she was rich, but I didn't think her parents were giving her such an allowance. So one day I pulled her aside and asked her how she was getting her money. She told me that her dad had a credit card and the limit was so high that he never noticed when a few bucks was missing. I understood this, but I still told her that it was dangerous. I knew that her dad was strict, and if he knew, the consequences would have been dire. She told me not to worry. After her 17th birthday, she got a car from her parents. That was the highest acquisition in our little group, and everybody else was starting to look up to her in admiration. It was obvious that she liked it, but I knew her 5 minutes of fame wasn't going to last long because my dad also promised me a car, a BMW, and by the specs, it was far superior to Roxanne's car. When I drove it to school, my friends were all in awe. I could see the jealousy seething out of Roxanne's ears. It was funny to watch. I thought the jealousy was where it was going to end for her, but unfortunately, I was wrong. One day after school, Roxanne and I were talking as we walked to the parking lot. She told me she left her car at home because it had a problem and she wanted to ride with me. I said sure. And then she also asked if she could drive. I should have suspected something here, but she was my friend. Or at least I thought she was. I let her drive, and on the way, she kept complaining about how different my steering was from hers. We were almost at my home when she made a weird, sharp turn and drove my car straight into a tree. I was horrified. She kept saying that she was sorry and that it was an accident, but none of it seemed like an accident. Even as she apologized, I could see the glint in her eyes, which made me know it was all an act. She wanted to crash my car on purpose. That's why she left her car home and asked to drive mine. I was upset, but more than that, I was hurt. I didn't expect something like that from someone I called my friend. As crazy as Julie was, at least I knew she could never do something as hurtful as that. I decided that day that I was going to get revenge. I couldn't let her get away with what she's done. After a week, I started on my plan. I went to her house to hang, and when she left the room, I looked around and found her dad's credit card. She always had it with her but returned it before he got back to work. That day, I went home with it, and the next day I went on an online spending spree. I didn't want to go anywhere because I couldn't have my face captured in case they decided to launch an investigation. I even found a way to withdraw some cash to fix my car. But that day, I completely maxed out the card. Roxanne didn't notice, of course. She wasn't getting the spending statement. All she knew was that the card was missing, but she probably thought she misplaced it somewhere. When I got to school, I distracted her with some guy in the hallway she liked and slipped the card into her tote bag. A few days later, Roxanne came to the school by bus. Apparently, her car had been seized and she'd been grounded till graduation by her parents. They noticed the charges and then searched her room. They found the credit card with her and decided that she stole the money. No matter how she tried to deny it, it only got worse because when they looked through all the purchases, they realized that she had been stealing money from the card for a long time. So, she was punished. She couldn't tell me and the gang what happened because she knew they were going to laugh at her. She kept to herself from that day on, and slowly our once vibrant friendship became forgotten. I have no regrets though. I can't be friends with someone who would sabotage me like that. You know, I'm almost willing to believe that if this was reported to the police, that there could be a legitimate investigation in which they investigate why this happened. Because it's not like you just randomly go swerving and crash into something like that. Unless, of course, OP had another reason they didn't want the cops sniffing around. Our next story is, I ruined my brother's career as a footballer before it even started. I had the most turbulent childhood, no thanks to my violent big brother and our mom who enabled all his bad and oftentimes atrocious behavior. When my brother got almost kicked out of high school for bullying his classmates, my mom went with him to the school begging and crying that the school let him off once again. He had been accused of bullying others in the past, but this time, the evidence was damning. My mom blamed her and our dad's divorce for his behavior. Never mind that my parents had gotten a divorce a year before and had been separated since I was 4, and promised to have him withdraw from school to have him homeschooled. She didn't want the school to expel him to avoid his clean record getting tampered with. My brother was a football player and she hoped he'd get a football scholarship and go on to be a renowned football player. To my mom, my brother was the golden goose. She discovered his love for football early on and decided that she wanted to manage him in his career. All she dreamed about was one day becoming his manager, micromanaging his life, and keeping starstruck women away from him. My brother was never wrong. He could never do any wrong in her sight, and she supported his behavior, both bad and good. The only time she chided him was when he was late for practice or did something that interfered with her dreams of him being a big-time football player. She was never bothered about other areas of his life, and she also never bothered about her other child. My mom paid him all the attention and left me to raise myself. I'm the younger sibling, but my mom paid my brother more attention. He was allowed to do whatever he wanted, while I had the strictest rules set for me. I had to do most of the chores as my mom was too busy working her job and being my brother's momager to handle them, and we could not afford to get help. My brother was exempted from house chores because he had to find time to study and train. I barely had friends because there was hardly any time left from doing all the chores and sometimes even fixing meals for my brother. Many times I would sleep off while cleaning the kitchen or cleaning my brother's messy room, and my mom would get mad and accuse me of not being supportive and doing my part in making sure our family succeeds. Whenever I pointed out that my brother did nothing and would not even clean his own room, she would say that he was going to be a football star one day and he would be the breadwinner of our family. It was all just too ridiculous. Anyway, the principal fell for my mom's emotional manipulation and my brother was not expelled. He was, however, homeschooled for the rest of high school, as my mom promised. Just as my mom wanted, my brother got the scholarship and got into college while still building up his portfolio to play professionally when the time came. I hated my brother. We never had a good relationship. Aside from the fact that I resented him for having to do the chores alone, he was my biggest bully. He would taunt me and make jokes about my ears until I cried. My mom never did anything about it. Even when she did, she just casually told him to stop and never enforced any punishment for not stopping. As we both grew, he started to hit and pull at my hair. My mom saw all this happen, but she protected him. One day, our neighbor came over to the house and told my mom that she'd heard me screaming in the yard and suspected that my brother was hitting me. My mom immediately denied it and told her that my brother would never do something like that. When the neighbor left, she came into my room and berated me for not yelling while my brother hit me and accused me of trying to ruin his career. This is a background story of my brother and how he came to be the kind of person that was always looking to evade responsibilities. Unfortunately for my mother, their dream of him becoming a football star didn't materialize in his first 2 years of college. He was so frustrated, but he had to keep going with the hopes that he would get recruited to play for the university's football team. When he graduated from college and still hadn't been recruited, my mom started to despair and get desperate. He was a good player, no doubt, but many of the people who worked with him had a problem with his attitude. I had to move back home because my mom broke her hip. She was also going to sell our house and move into a smaller home, but I suggested that I move back in with her and pay for maintenance. We agreed that it was a good idea, and I moved back in with my brother and mother. My brother was barely ever around as he started to coach some high school kids. Shortly after I moved in, he began to date this woman in her senior year of college. Her dad was a big deal in the football scene, and I'd heard my brother tell my mom that he could use her to get to her dad and sign some football deal. My mom was excited about his plan, and she began to treat his girlfriend nicely. Let me also add that before he started to date this girl, he had a girlfriend. He'd been with his girlfriend, albeit on and off, since high school. Despite him being a complete jerk to her, she stayed with him. My brother did not just cheat on her numerous times, he also verbally abused her, and whenever they got into arguments in my mother's home, he would threaten to hit her, and on some occasions he would hit her. My mom knew he hit his girlfriend, but she would always pretend to be unaware. I asked her one day why she wasn't doing anything about that, and she said she didn't want to be up in his private business. Never mind that she was always in his business and they had this weird mother-son relationship where there were no boundaries and she micromanaged his life. After my brother started dating the new girl, he dumped his old girlfriend, but I guess he couldn't show his jerk side to his new girlfriend. He had to go back to his old girlfriend to find someone to unleash his anger and frustration on. The old girlfriend came back into his life, well aware that he was dating someone else, but I don't think she cared. He may have told her that he was just using the new girl to achieve his dreams of playing as a professional. I think he told her that to keep her coming to him. He would go out on boat cruises and take small trips with his rich girlfriend and then return home to be with his old girlfriend in the room he grew up in. Even though his old girlfriend was with him knowing he was with someone else, he still came home to yell at her, threaten to throw her out, she didn't live with us but was always coming around, and abused her verbally and physically. As my brother and his rich girlfriend's relationship progressed, he would tell my mom about how close he was to the goal. The goal was to use her to get to her father. One evening, he and his girlfriend had dinner with her dad, and he came home to tell my mom that he made sure to charm him. My mom had given him tips on how to act before he went on the date, and he proudly told her that he used her tips. He just had to wait and watch his girlfriend's dad change his life. My mom even joked about him marrying the new girlfriend if he had to do that to convince her father. She laughed and all, but she was serious. I know my mom, and she would do just about anything to see that her dreams for my brother materialized. As my mom and brother's plans went further, I mostly just ignored them both. I was used to being ignored by my mom anyway, so I mostly just kept to myself and focused on my career. At this time, my mom and I were keeping the house together financially, while my brother did nothing but coach little boys for free and hang around his rich girlfriend. One fine afternoon, I called in sick and stayed back at home to rest. I had been working non-stop for months and I needed to give my body a break. I was in the kitchen trying to make myself a bowl of cereal so I could eat and go back to bed when my brother walked in, his old girlfriend on his arm. He asked what I was doing in the house, and I explained why I wasn't leaving for work. He then muttered, lazy butt, under his breath, and the dumb old girlfriend burst out laughing. I was mad. My mom and I were doing everything to keep the family together, and someone who could barely buy a box of cereal as his contribution to the family was calling me lazy. Yeah, why are you not at your job? I shot back. Oh, sorry, you don't have any. I heard my brother mutter something as I turned to leave for my room. I heard his girlfriend try to hold him and heard him shove her away before he attacked me. That was the last thing I remembered before I passed out from the blows he dealt me. Later that day, I woke up in the community hospital, my mother by my side. The doctor came in and told her we could go. When we got into the car, my mom touched my forehead and apologized to me. He was very sorry, she said. He cried as we brought you to the hospital. I knew that he wasn't sorry and that he was going to do it again if I stayed in the house. He had hit me many times before, and my mom had covertly taken his side. When I got home, he brought a cup of tea to my room and muttered an apology. The week after, I swung into action. The first thing I did was send his girlfriend an email asking to meet. I told her I was his friend. When we met, I told her the truth about our relationship and his behavior, his other girlfriend, and how he hit me. Then I told her what was most important, that he was going to use her to get to her dad. She still didn't look like she believed me, so I told her about all the things my mom had asked my brother to do to charm her dad. I felt bad for her because she was genuinely hurt. But when I tried to console her, she snatched my hands away and accused me of being just as horrible. She said I would have never have reached out to help her if he hadn't hit me. She was right though, so when she told me to leave, I did. I realized that my mom and brother had created an unhealthy dynamic, and that living in the house with them was going to affect me badly. I mean, I'd already gotten a black eye and bruised lips. That day, I went home with my best friend, we packed all my stuff, and I went to live with her. The rich girl broke up with my brother and told her dad about him. As I mentioned earlier, her dad was a big deal in football, big enough to blackmail him and end his career as a football player before it even started. My mom never forgave me, and I never cared. Can we pretty much all agree that it was a long shot anyways? Even with like the perfect amount of schmoozing and being the most likable future son-in-law type guy, that it really was almost never going to materialize into an actual career? Like maybe they would be lucky enough to make it to like the training camp roster, if that. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest story, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.